Welcome to our presentation on CSS Selectors, an essential part of front-end development. CSS Selectors are patterns used to select elements on a web page so you can apply styles to them. Understanding how to use CSS Selectors effectively allows for greater control and precision of styling HTML elements. In this presentation, we'll explore various common selectors and demonstrate how they can be utilized in web development. Each selector serves a different purpose and can be combined to target elements more specifically. So the very basic CSS selector first is the element selector. The element selector targets HTML elements directly by their tag name. For instance, using H1, we will set the color blue. This will style all H1 elements to have a blue text. This selector is very useful for applying global styles to specific types of elements. It's straightforward and it applies the same style to every instance of the chosen element. However, this lacks specificity, meaning all H1 tags will be affected uniformly without distinction. So to demonstrate this one, let me show you the structure of our HTML. We have div ID of section 1 with heading elements. And inside the section 1, we have another division for external container. And inside the external container, we have two paragraphs. We have also an ordered list. And also we have an inner container div. So we have also a section 2 division with two headings, an external container class, an ordered list, and the last part will be the footer. So again, let's go back to H1 element. So if we style this one, for example, this one is an element selector. So if we target H1 and give it a property of blue, so all H1 element in this example will be colored blue. So this is H1. This one is another H1. So all H1 element in this example will be color blue because we are targeting on an element selector level. So this means that all H1 tag will have the property of color blue. So that's the simple definition of element selector. Now another one, how about we have group selector? So designated by a comma. So if we want to style all headers to be aligned at center, so what we can do is to add a comma. For example, we are targeting the element H1, H2, comma H3, then all three headings if we are using the text align center. So there will be aligned center. So across the HTML element. So as you can see, H1, H2, H3, we have text align center. And at the bottom of the div, we have H1 and H2. So we have also text align center. So instead of doing this individually, for example, so we can use the shorthand, which is by using a comma, such as this. So if you want to group selectors with a common settings of text align center, you don't need to do this one. Instead, you add comma and group each specific settings. So this one, by the way, uh, if you are familiar in programming, so the comment in CSS is similar to Java and C++. So this is a sample comment. So this one is example of group selector. Remember, so you remember the comma, for example. Then we have also the ID selector, which is indicated by a hash. So the ID selector targets an element based on its unique ID attribute. For this example, we have hashtag section1 indicating that we are targeting HTML element with an ID of section1. So the background will be green background. So should IDs are unique within an HTML document. This makes the ID a very selector specific. So we are using ID specifically for large chunk of the layout. For example, the footer part of the web page, the navigation part. So ID in a single web page, this one is unique to the each every page. So this is very flexible. However, overusing the ID selector can reduce the flexibility of your CSS, as IDs, again, are meant to be unique per page. So for example, if you're using ID, so let's see our HTML. So we have here ID equals section1. In order to use the specific ID, we can say, let us document our code. So this is ID selector. So hashtag section1. So let's have a background of green. So this one. So this so so from section 1 heading 1 up to the general sibling selector of inner container. So let me modify the colors. For example, let's convert this to pink. So from here on out, from section 1 with an ID of section, its equivalent is hashtag section 1. So this one. So from here up to the general sibling selector, which is a paragraph, so all will be affected with our specific property of background pink. So again, ID equals section 1, the equivalent in CSS in order to target those specific ID is hashtag section 1. So we have also the class selector based on the presentation, which is signified by a period. So the class selector targets elements based on their class attribute, which can be shared among multiple elements. For instance, we have here a class of dark with a background of black and a color of white. This will be applied to a specific HTML element with the property of class dark. Classes are reusable and it allows greater flexibility in styling similar elements across a page. Unlike IDs, multiple elements can share the same class, making it easier to maintain and update the style consistently. So if we are applying a class here, so for example, we have H1 of class dark. Remember, our H1 already have a blue text, but we can overwrite this by using a specific class. So for example, we have a class of dark again, which is signified by a period. This one is a class selector, so which is signified by a period. So for example, we have a background of black and a color of white. So let me show you. So we have a background of black, for example. That's our H1 with the dark. And we have also a color of white. So the only one that's being affected here is the section 1 heading with an h1 of class dark. So remember, if you're using classes, this means that period dark is equivalent to class dark. So we also have the next selector is a descendant selector. So what is a descendant selector? The descendant selector targets elements that are nested within other elements. For example, here, we are targeting here a paragraph that is part of the footer tag. These are selector that is useful for applying styles in a specific context, ensuring that only the nested elements are affected. It's a powerful way to create structure and organize styles, maintaining hierarchy and specificity within your CSS. So for example, if we are using this example once again, we have a footer, so right here. So the footer has a p element inside. So that qualifies as a descendant selector. For example, this one is a descendant selector, for example. So we have a footer space signified by space. It's right here. So footer space p. For example, we have a color, how about green? So at the bottom, as you can see, so the footer paragraph transform to a color green. So how about this one? What if I change this one to div p? So all paragraph inside a div will become color green. So container one paragraph. So let's inspect this one. So we have container paragraph one. So the paragraph is inside a div. So this one is being affected. So another one, container paragraph two. So inside a div. So inner container paragraph is also inside a div. So how about general sibling selector, which is a paragraph, which is also inside a div, which is the external container. So if you want to be specific, so you can do this one. So we have an external container, which is a class, for example. So we can modify this. This one is external container. So the only one that will be affected here is the paragraph inside the external container. How about we change this one? How about we have inner container? So for example, we have inner container. So the only one that gets affected is specifically is the inner container. That's why it's called the cascading style sheet. So the settings cascade depending on its usage. So we have also the next selector we have is signified by a greater than sign, which is a direct child selector. So what is a direct child selector? A direct child selector targets elements that are direct. Remember the word direct children of a specified element. So for this example, using div greater than h1 with a background of yellow, this applies the yellow background only to h1 tags that are direct. Remember, direct children of div tags. This selector is more specific than the descendant selector and is useful for precise styling when elements are closely related to each other. It helps in targeting immediate children without affecting the deeper nested elements. So for example, if we want to demonstrate the direct child, so let me write on the screen and explain this thoroughly. So the div here, for example, it is inner container. will be the parent. So its direct child will be the container paragraph 1. This is a direct child of the external container. Another direct child will be the container paragraph 2. Another direct child will be the UL as part of the external container. So what's the direct child of external container? Once again, we have also the inner container. And the last one, the direct child, is the general sibling selector of the inner container. So we have the parent and the direct child. So this means in a family structure, these are the biological daughters or sons of the external container. So this will be signified by the greater than sign. So let me demonstrate this one to you. So the usage will be, for example, all paragraph that is only the direct child of the external container. So for example, so let me comment on this direct child or children. So we have the class of external container greater than P. It means all direct child of the external container that is a paragraph. So for example, in this example, we use the background yellow. So as you can see here, if I complete this code, so all the direct child of the external container is the one who is only affected. So the inner container paragraph, as you can see here, do not have the yellow background because it is not, remember, it is not a direct child of the external container, but the inner container paragraph is a direct child of the inner container. So this is more specific. So the code is correct because the only direct child of the external container is the container paragraph 1 and 2 and the general sibling selector inner container for section 1. And we have also external container here. Its direct child, remember, is the section 2 paragraph 1. There's no paragraph inside this one other than the direct child of our external container. Then, second to the last, we have also what we call the adjacent sibling or signified by plus. So what are adjacent sibling? Adjacent sibling selector targets an element that is the immediately preceded by a specific element. For example, div plus p with a background of yellow applies the yellow background to a paragraph tag that directly, remember this, directly follows a div tag. Dict selector is useful for styling elements that follow specific siblings, providing control over elements that appear sequentially in the HTML structure. It ensures that only the adjacent sibling is affected and not all sibling. So for example, so what if I target here the inner container? So let's go to section 1. So what if I target here, for example, the inner container, if that will be possible. So what if I say, for example, this one is the adjacent sibling selector. This is only a comment. So that we are targeting an inner container, but with an adjacent sibling of inner P. So this one, so what will be the adjacent sibling of inner container? So this one is not the adjacent sibling because this one, remember, is the direct child. So its adjacent sibling will be this general sibling selector of inner container, for example. Okay, so this one will be affected. So if I gave it, for example, we have inner container plus p, and we gave it a background of yellow. So this one, so let's change this one. So instead of yellow, how about we give a background of orange? So this one is the adjacent sibling of the inner container. So the next paragraph preceded by an inner container is the adjacent sibling selector. So let's find this one. So how about the adjacent sibling of list item 1? So how about this one? Adjacent sibling of list item 1. So for example, we have dot list item 1. So how about plus li? So how about we give it a background of black, for example. So this one. So another one. So the adjacent sibling of list item 1 for a single list is list number 2. So how about I add another plus here? So it means that the third li will be affected based on the adjacency. Okay, and the last one, we have the general sibling selector. So the general sibling selector targets all siblings of a specified element that follow in the HTML structure. So for this example, we have div tilde, which is tilde p. So it will style uh, paragraph tags that follows a div tag regardless of their position. This selector is less restrictive than the adjacent sibling selector and is useful for styling multiple sibling in relation to a particular element. It provides a broader scope of styling within sibling elements, offering again flexibility in design. So if I demonstrate this one, so how about I give this a class, for example, I'm giving this a class. How about I give this one, class. So for example, O list item. So we have a class of O list item. So this one is adjacent sibling. So this one is general sibling. So we have that OL list item, if I'm not mistaken. So O list item. So we have O list item, then we're using the tilde of li. So this one will be the settings. So look at this portion. So if I give it a background, for example, of aqua, so only the list 2 and 3 will be affected. This is very less restrictive than the adjacent sibling as you will compare in this. For example, I remove the another li, so the list 02 will be affected. So if I add another li, so this one is the adjacent sibling and the general sibling. So we are targeting here all the sibling of the OL list item, which is list 02 and list 03. So that concludes our lecture for our common CSS settings. So for our next lecture, we'll be exploring more CSS selectors, specifically pseudo elements, pseudo classes, and attribute selector. So again, thank you for listening and see you on the next lecture.